Welcome to this episode of the 10-Minute Beauty Business Podcast. Today, we are talking about teams, leadership, friction, tools. How do we maximize this stuff? And we have guru of all of the above, Kasie Heiden. Kasie, welcome to the 10-Minute Beauty Business Podcast. You are not a beauty professional, which I think is a really good thing for this conversation. So tell us what you do and just know that I'm so excited to have you here because these are the conversations salon owners need to be having in order to really get the heck out of the way, stop bottlenecking their success. And when we were introduced by a mutual friend, I'm like, okay, wait, can you be on my podcast? Like, I think that was like the second thing I asked you. So glad you're here. Tell us all about you and let's get into the combo.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to be here. So I work with entrepreneurs and executives to really help them understand how their own brain works and how the brains of the people around them work. So we can identify any of those moments when you've had friction with teammates, turn it into traction, and make sure that your business is running lean and efficient, because we all have big goals that we're chasing, and especially salon owners, you don't have time to try a whole bunch of different tactics. You don't have time to hire,
You don't have time to do anything,
fire, all of that type of stuff. Like, you are busy and you have clients to serve and a mission and purpose, and this is exactly what we do, is help you try to figure out how to live that mission and purpose.
Okay, so let's get into it. So tell me, like, give me an example of like friction that becomes your tactic. I think that's what you said, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
so
in the salon.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody has unique abilities, and especially people who have chosen non-traditional paths of work, their brain tends to see things in a little bit different way, but they don't necessarily always realize or appreciate that not everybody else around them can do that. So for example, I was actually working with a client who does wedding makeup, and one of her strengths is creating this empathy around people. Like, she just knows what they're feeling. She can like see it radiate off. And so when she knows that one of the things that she needs is time, like she needs space for her client, she needs to be able to engage, she can articulate that to the team around. So rather than coming up and asking questions while she's with a client, they can set up a process and a system that gives time, like a buffer time before and after each client, to address anything. As opposed to somebody who maybe has a really strong communication and brainstorming talent, they might be able to handle those questions coming at them while they are dealing with a client and continue on making that client feel special just because they have different talents. But if you don't know that as one of the teammates, you could very easily be operating in a way that feels good to you, but actually causes tension for that business owner, for that leader.
Yeah, I often say, like, just because you know who you are doesn't mean that you know yourself. And that is really, the self-leadership is the strongest tool that you can build, or the muscle that you can flex as an entrepreneur. Because really, like, if you don't know that you need, like, and you're just pissed all the time, like you don't know, then you're just mad, or as a leader, maybe barking at your staff or your assistants on somebody's wedding day, like not real appropriate. Like, like that's going to have a detrimental effect on your business. So I love, you gave me some stats before we started, which is crazy. So on average, clients that work with you on this type of work get 6 times the productivity almost immediately. So when I think about that in terms of the salon, I think about like the owner having to do less work is what I see as productivity there, because then they're delegating effectively. Is that what you mean?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if anybody has read or heard Dan Martell talk about buying back your time. And it's not just an idea of delegating tasks, right? But there's a level of what are you good at and what do you enjoy? And when you understand that about yourself and you understand that about those around you, again, you can create that business system where it is efficient, like you're delegating things efficiently and in a way that feels good. So you're not just keeping the things that are important, but you absolutely hate, right? Like, that's not a recipe for success in a business. And so it's about delegating and delegating the right thing so you have the best energy to run your business.
Yeah, for sure. What's an exercise or like what's the first thing you tell people to do to figure out what they like or what they should delegate or like
Yeah,
is there some sort of
absolutely.
the process we can share with my listeners?
Yeah, so I utilize a tool called CliftonStrengths. The reason I use that tool is because it's a self-assessment based on positive psychology. So what that means is that when you take this assessment, it's peeling out all of the ways that you have interpreted that you found success in the past and putting them in words that relate to you. So when we work with a leader, we want to start with ourselves first, and then we do that same thing with their team. So you have a common language of how to communicate.
No. What's it called again? Say it again.
CliftonStrengths.
Oh, okay. We'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, I think that those kind of like it just helps you get to know yourself better, right? And then your team understands what they're doing so that then you can mesh and integrate better. I think leadership is one of those things that well doesn't come naturally to everybody.
No, and I think what has happened, I mean, like lots of areas of our society, right? Like you're sort of taught a single way.
Uh-huh.
And one of the reasons why CliftonStrengths even came into existence is that they tried to study all of these people at the top of their field, trying to figure out what the X factor is. And
Mm-hmm.
the X factor wasn't a specific trait, it was that they knew who they were and they were authentic to what made themselves successful and then hired people around them for the rest. And that's sort of the piece that I think people get when you say it, but we're not trained to operate or build a business that way.
Well, no, and also, uh, I mean, it's in some ways like you're supposed to be a robot CEO if you're at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yep.
and I think in our industry specifically, I mean, we're changing, like, we don't fit the mold anywhere, right? Like, we're predominantly women. There's, of course, some struggles and some stuff there when it comes to like corporate jobs and things like that in our industry. But like, I mean, we're working moms mostly, holding it all together at home in the salon for everybody else. Like, and then on top of that, you're trying to lead a team and help them grow their business and invest in them at the same time, hoping that they don't just like take your investment and run, like your investment of your time into them to grow their business, etc. And so the leadership portions sometimes just like don't get addressed. Like, and people are just out there like winging it. And it sometimes it works great, right? Like, I mean, we've all got our hair done and the salon looks fine to the consumer, but in the underneath, it's like everybody's doggy paddling underneath the water or whatever. So I think that this is why I wanted to have you here to be like, okay, but like how do we get around like even like how do you recognize you have a leadership problem?
Mm.
Like, like what's
So
that first thing other than like you're just probably scrambling?
yeah. Um, well, first of all, I think leadership is one of those skills that has infinite development,
Hmm.
right? The better a leader you are, the more you're going to recognize that there are different problems that you can address.
Hmm.
And so I would challenge people not to think about it as, well, do I have a leadership problem? And really look at it as, okay, where can my leadership be more of an asset to my business?
Hmm.
And not just, I'm a good leader. Because I think a lot of people do have some of the surface level skills that they enjoy leading teams. People are drawn to them. They're comfortable making decisions, and they still stumble into some of these miscommunications where people start projecting other meaning on something that people said, especially you just mentioned women. Like, our brains are always full,
Hmm.
and it is human nature to look for something negative because that's how our brain was developed to survive. And so leadership to me is the ability to communicate and ask for communication from people, so that way you're getting on the same page more frequently and can move forward together. And I think that that's also why women, once they commit to developing their leadership skill and utilize some of these assessment tools, they take off so much faster than what we see in like a traditional corporate world.
Around the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I completely agree with that. I think what percentage do you think when you show up to a business that's like, I mean, I'm assuming people when they call you, things are like probably some of them are going epic, but most of them are like help. And so with the ones that are like help, how much of the issues are emotionally driven?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I would say I mean, the vast majority of the ones that need help and know that they need help can feel the emotional connection. And it's usually one of two things. Either sort of like the lingering effects of leaders who are no longer there, right? So
Mhm.
somebody has left and now people feel like they can come out and start having these conversations. And so it's kind of building that trust and credibility there. Um, the other side is sometimes, and this is probably about a third of my clients, there is a there is a specific relationship that a leader thinks they can improve by bringing me in to facilitate a workshop. And what almost always happens in that conversation is that everybody around sort of has one of those like, oh, moments because they realize that they've been projecting similar things to other people, but it just hadn't reached that point of noticeable tension in the
Mhm.
organization. So there's always a moment where they sort of look around and do the, oh, even my best friend, like, this is why I make fun of you for doing X, Y, and Z. And it kind of drives me crazy, but I love you. So I didn't think that it was a problem in the business.
Mhm. Yeah, and in the salon specifically, there's so many dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I think that, and I always say like facts over feelings, right? Like we need data, let your emotions go. You can deal with those later, but they like kind of don't have a big place in making decisions in your business, right? Of course, we're humans. We have emotions. We can't like literally chop ourselves in half, but I think that a lot of really poor decisions and poor moments in the salon come from emotional places where it's either lack of planning and preparation on the leader's part, which could be as simple as just not having SOPs, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
standard operating procedures. Or it could be that like they are making emotionally driven decisions or movements, or they haven't taken responsibility for the actions that need to be corrected early enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so stuff just like builds up and then it explodes and then you're just mad. And really it could have been handled with a simple text or a Slack message or an email or Pumble or something, and then now you're here because it's like literally like a bomb.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point about feedback specifically. And this is one of the areas where I see high achieving women once they acknowledge this is why their business starts to grow quicker. Um, an SOP does not necessarily work, or the feedback that you like does not necessarily work for all people.
Hmm.
You as the leader need to understand what is important, again, based off of the way somebody's brain works. What type of data, how much data, how do you communicate that data? And once you understand that, it is more efficient to communicate in those quick little moments and provide that instant feedback instead of what tends to happen, which is we give somebody an instruction, we give them a document, we give them a checklist that doesn't work out. And in our heads, we start to think, well, I did everything I could for them. Like clearly it's a them problem and not a me problem, or it's just not a good fit. And almost always when we get to the bottom of what's going on, it is just because we're seeing the world slightly differently. And when we get on the same page, it starts to fix itself and there's a pathway forward for people.
So, okay, let me give you a common example that I hear in the salon. And also, um, this is like a two-part question because I think that age sometimes maybe can come into play in the salon for sure, with the dynamic. I'm sure in other businesses as well, but in other businesses, there's more of a strategic hierarchy where like you won't have people of different ages, and experience levels on the same level, right? Like you're not going to have C-suite CEOs and different those sort of types and like the assistant like doing the same work,
Mhm.
right? Like that's not going to happen in corporate America. Um I don't believe anyways, for my limited
Yeah.
experience. And watching movies. But in the salon, that's exactly what happens. And so we have the CEO right next to the, the intern, as you will.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's some like, and then we have different generations and we have different expectations and all these things that we do maneuver as humans, of course. But I think that that can be sometimes challenging. So with that framework in mind, here's an example, and walk me through how we would figure out what to do. So we have a new assistant in the salon. She's technically amazing. She's doing a great job. She's seeing clients. Like her work is fine, but she's not meeting the salon culture. Like she's quiet. She's not really like, we don't really have any reason to like her. Like,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
she's not putting herself out there. And it's like, we've communicated that this is what our salon culture is and this is what you do. And she's very sweet and she's great and she shows up perfectly, following dress code and she's on time and she's doing everything right, but it doesn't feel right. So like, how do we start to address that from leadership? And how do you include the rest of the team and like maneuver that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that comes up in a lot of areas, especially for people who have really strong um, internal processing strengths. So
Okay.
they are doing a lot of work in their head, the wheels are turning, maybe even like for their executing talents, they're looking for that next thing to do.
Mhm.
Um, by understanding, right, by understanding what's going on in their brain, you actually empower everybody else in that salon to give positive feedback when they are doing something that is advantageous or helpful, or even putting themselves out there. So that might look like, um, I had a client who had high intellection and high input strengths, which basically means that they have really complex thoughts and they're really good at collecting data and remembering it all. And so there were a lot of times where people would come and complain and be like, she's just not friendly.
Okay.
And what was really happening is that she was already trying to think about how she could serve and help somebody solve a problem with the resources she had in her brain. She was just so lost in thought that she lost like control of her facial expressions, right?
She was 10 steps
Um,
ahead.
yep. And so once they understood that, they could sort of call that to attention and say, hey, I can see that you're in thought. Do you mind helping me with this? Right? Hey, I appreciate the information you gave to me. Um, does this feel like a good time to make a decision? Hey, I really appreciate when you greet a guest with a smile because it's going to have a lasting impact on our mission and purpose to serve them
Mhm.
with excellence, right? And now all of a sudden you get their wheels turning on, oh, so when I do this, here's how it's helping. It connects
Right.
that value and that talent that you've identified in them. And that's also the advantage of bringing in somebody to facilitate, because then you empower their voice. So
Yeah.
when they have a moment where they're saying, hey, when I'm doing billing work, I really need to be able to be thoughtful about this because I'm thinking through the entire client engagement and not just the one interaction. So then the leader of the organization can say, great, we're going to have you do billing on these days or during these hours in this sort of environment. So that way we can honor your strengths. And we're also going to expect that you're going to be at the front greeting people during this other period of time.
Right. You
So
can't
it's
do both at
just
the same
getting on the
time.
same page.
Yeah. So really in that scenario, you would say like really get to know the stylist and then use some sort of positive reinforcement and help them create like, but you have to have a conversation
Yeah.
ultimately.
And that's it. Like you have to have a conversation. You have to approach that conversation with curiosity instead of judgment and assume positive intent. And then you
Hmm.
have to do something with that information.
Right.
Um, 1 out of 4, yeah, 1 out of 4 people report that they have received positive recognition or feedback in their last 7 days at work.
Oh,
Only 25%,
I was
which,
thinking more than I was expecting,
right. Well, and the
but that's
problem
not very
too is
many.
that most of the time that positive feedback is, hey, good job or thank you.
Right.
It's
It's
not
not
very
action.
specific either. Um, And
Not
I
moving
think
the
that
needle
that's
forward.
where, when your brain is trained to recognize what's wrong, that person very well could be looking at everybody else thinking, oh my God, they hate me and I made a mistake.
Oh, for
And,
sure. Right.
like there's so many different things that could be happening.
Yeah, so you just have to have a conversation. And I think it comes down to knowing like what your expectations are and being able to communicate those as well. Really, like it's all communication, right? I mean, it's yeah, you have to know what you're good at, what they're good at and whatever, but like what is the like desired outcome and is it a joint desired outcome? Like are we really on the same team? Because sometimes that's at play too. In the salon, like people are like they think they're on the same team, but they have a personal agenda or I mean, we're just humans,
Yep, exactly.
right?
Well, and words have meaning too. And
Mhm.
so understanding what that means to you, what that means to the other person. For salon owners, I would probably equate it to when a client comes in and shows a picture and says, I want this. And they're using a completely wrong
Language.
application of that term, right? Um, they don't know any better. They
Mm-mm.
probably heard somebody use it in that way. And as salon owners and stylists, like you are trained to ask follow-up questions and
Right.
to
Like it's a
guide them
consultation.
to, yeah, to guide them to the next point. And that's the piece that tends to be missing in a team dynamic because we're so busy focusing on the to-do list.
Right, for sure. So how much of the like after you figure out who the people are and what their strengths are and this and that and whatever, how much of what you suggest like for the team to move forward to get this like 33% increase in team retention and six times more productivity and ultimately productivity equals more money, et cetera, et cetera. Um, how much of that is contingent upon the people you're asking to do something in an organization or in the salon on their personal desires?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I would say it's less personal desires and more whether they're bought into the success
The company.
of the company and what they are doing. Um, People love to feel good about themselves. They love to be able to share what they do well. And there's a way to connect that to their personal values, their personal desires. Even if somebody were to say, yeah, I am working this, reception job until I make X amount of money. Here's my goal. Great. Like that's all out on the same page and we can do something with that. The problem is when you get people who are not bought in and they sort of have that negative attitude about everything.
Right.
And I like to tell leaders, this team facilitation and using CliftonStrengths is the best chance of saving that person. And that may be another conversation that we need to have for a different point in time. But that's also part of the reality of being a leader. And you sort of owe it to everybody to give them the best chance at getting themselves out of whatever situation and still being able to move forward.
Right. But sometimes people are just not a right fit.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%. And I think that that's why this helps. Like if you're inviting somebody to share what they do well and they're not willing to participate in the conversation, like that's a different type of conversation that you're going to need to have.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think that those are, but it's also nice to have this as a framework to say like, hey, we're going to work on this and see. And these are things that can be done, in team building exercises and like you
Mhm.
can make this fun, I would assume. And
Mhm.
I mean, to me, it's like the quiz at the back at Cosmo. Like everybody wants to know like what their
Yes.
strengths are and want to know those things. So I think that that could be very fun. But as a salon owner, like if you have a salon manager and stylist and assistants and, maybe, most of the teams are pretty lean, right? Because like everybody wears a lot of different roles. But still like there's just people that work together and share space. And I think that it's nice to it's nice to know who you're working with. Like just even as an aside, like just to kind of, I mean, I think this would be a great thing to do in an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has so many applications because again, it's all about communicating and moving forward together, which I mean, whether it's sports or business or
Yeah.
family life, like once you understand yourself and understand those around you, like it is easier to do things together. We just spend so much time at work, and especially as business owners, like it's such an important
Yeah.
part of your life that this is where, when we talk about your whole person well-being, this is where we get the biggest outcome of investing in getting things to move forward.
Yeah, I love it. So important. Oh my gosh, Kasie, such good information. Tell us where we can find you online and where we can hang out. And then I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Ooh, all right. So, first of all, if this sounded interesting and you just want to learn more information, there is a Calendly link that will be in the show notes that goes to a free 15-minute booking. So you can come and ask questions, see if it's a good fit, just chat about anything that you heard. I'm also on LinkedIn, Kasie Heiden, and then also Instagram, Kasie.Heiden. That's where I do most of the work in the DMs. And I'm happy to build something out customized for you and your team.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is really fun. I think that doing this with a salon team, like to me, even just taking it for yourself, right? Like coming down and like figuring it out and doing maybe some one-on-one, like what are my strengths? What are my, like, where can I improve? And just talking through this stuff is really eye-opening, especially if
Mm-hmm.
you have big goals and if you're looking at the rest of this year going, man, like I just want to get there, but I know that like there's some like because team is what gets you there. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
if there's something going on, like you got to work through it. And people often ask me after 18 years of having the salon and honestly, a very little turnover, like I still have women that have been there from the beginning. Um, they're like, how do you do it? And and in some ways, I don't know, right? And in a lot of ways, it's this stuff we're talking about.
Yep.
And it's really and we're such empaths that a lot of this comes intrinsically, but not everybody picks up the same frequencies. So I think that it's really worth looking into, and why I was so excited to have you here on the podcast to talk about this stuff. All right, rapid fire questions. What are you obsessed with right now?
Ooh, what am I obsessed with right now? I mean, all things personal development, sales girl reading, just makes me so happy. And I think it gets me like in the right mindset for just like even convincing my 4-year-old daughter that she needs to use the bathroom before we go on a car trip.
You're like, I will get you there.
I
Okay, so what are you reading right now?
am currently reading Dan Martell, Buy Back Your Time. And then Alex Hormozy, 100 Million Leads is also on my second read.
Okay, so you're like all business all the time
Yeah, right now.
right now. What do you do for fun?
I golf, play volleyball. We live out on a golf course and just hang out with friends. And then my husband and I also own a bar in town. So,
What are you doing there?
sometimes work a second job down there.
How fun. What kind of bar?
It is, the university's like alumni bar that people come back to and
Uh-huh.
snap pictures at. That's the type of bar we own.
Oh, and where are you? I forgot already.
Vermillion, South Dakota.
Oh, South Dakota. Cool. How fun. All right. Well, we'll have to, does the bar have an Instagram?
It does. Carrie's Bar, I think is what it is. Careys, no apostrophe.
Okay, this is fun. See the things you don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm sure in the bar, it's so very similar to the salon in terms of like empathy, people coming in, spilling their guts, like maybe staying too long. Like, I mean, this sort of like these relationships, the dynamic. And so I'm sure you take this to a whole new level with your staff at the bar. That's fun.
Yeah, it is really fun.
So fun. All right, you guys, this has been another episode of the 10-Minute Beauty Business Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please tag Kasie, tag me. If you post on your stories, let us know that you listened, things that you're excited about. And we hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.